In other news, on April 7, United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator and Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, visited Bucha and Irpin outside Kiev, and he described the visit as horrifying. Let's listen in.
Well, I think we had a terrible privilege going to those places because what we saw was terribly shocking. We saw an open grave in a churchyard where apparently there are 280 bodies which the local people had brought to that grave because they were left to lie in the street or to lie in the morgue. They hadn't been buried during the period of the fighting in that place. And so they were brought to this open grave. And now, as we were there, now they're being exhumed, they're being brought out of that grave, still not properly buried. And you know how that is for family members. Because, of course, it's a crime scene. And they need forensic examination of those bodies before they can properly, safely, respectfully be laid to rest. I think that is such a terrible indictment of the world that we're living in today, where that can happen anywhere. It's not about being in Europe or not being in Europe. That inhumanity is something which is intolerable. Well, we need cash to get into the hands of these people, because in Ukraine there's still a market. So people can buy food and so forth. So we need to get cash safely to those who need it. Not to everybody, but those who need it. And the government of Ukraine has some very, very progressive digital platforms to do that. Secondly, we need temporary accommodation, because they can't go back into places that are ruined, but they probably need to come back close to home. So there's going to be a need for urgent temporary accommodation, flat pack housing, whatever it is. Thirdly, we do need supplies, right? We do need supplies. We need food, stable food. We need also to repair water systems and so forth. These things are things that a classic humanitarian operation can and will do. Those things we can achieve. The things that worry me more is getting access to people who are still in the heart of war. I think what we need to do is to have much more clarity between the Russian Federation and the Ukrainian authorities about safe passage. Because as we've seen recently, getting people out of Mariupol is a daily frustration. So corridors are announced, but then they don't work. We've begun to see good success with our convoys going to hard-to-reach places with supplies. We've done 4 now. We'll do 1 again tomorrow. We're ratcheting that up. That's good. But for safe evacuation of civilians in Mariupol, also in the Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk, a huge priority now, I think, for humanitarians, as well as for the government of Ukraine. That's something that we need to have really effective, engaged, joined up agreement between the two parties.
I think from the Second World War movies, but your track guards just usually push them out of the way, so we hash skirts just bump them sideways, but they will stop.
In Ukraine today, it is about what is about to happen. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says in a televised address that the whole European project is a target for Russian Federation and calls for more sanctions to end the war. Let's watch this.
Бо російська агресія не мала на меті обмежуватись лише однією Україною, лише руйнацією нашої свободи і нашого життя. Увесь європейський проєкт – ось мішень для Російської Федерації. Але Україна не має часу чекати. Свобода не має часу чекати. Коли тиранія розпочала агресію проти усього, на чому тримався мир в Європі, потрібно діяти негайно. І нафтове ембарго має бути першим кроком. Причому на рівні всіх демократичних держав, усього цивілізованого світу. Тоді Росія це відчує. Тоді це для них буде аргумент шукати мир, припинити безглузде насилля.
Ukraine is preparing for important battles against Moscow's forces In the east of the country, Russian troops seemed poised for a deadly new offensive in eastern Ukraine after more than 50 people died at an attack on a train station in Kramatorsk. Evacuations, meanwhile, continued from Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, where a missile strike on Friday killed 57 people at a railway station, according to a revised toll. Meanwhile, a strategic airport in the city of Dnipro was badly damaged in fresh shelling on Sunday. Ukraine's Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova said the country was examining the alleged culpability of 500 leading Russian officials for thousands of war crimes, including President Vladimir Putin. President Volodymyr Zelensky again condemned atrocities against civilians, and after speaking with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, said they had agreed that all perpetrators of war crimes must be identified and punished.
Meanwhile, the Philippine and Japanese governments deplored the civilian deaths in Bucha, scores of which were uncovered following the Russian forces' retreat from the Ukrainian city. Manila and Tokyo's foreign and defense ministers made the remarks during their inaugural 2+2 talks in Tokyo, but did not explicitly condemn any party over what had been described by Ukraine as a massacre. Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr., Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana, Japanese Foreign Minister Hayashi Yoshimasa, and Japanese Defense Minister Kishi Nobuo underscored that aggression against a United Nations member state constitutes a serious violation of international law, prohibiting the use of force, and is a grave breach of the UN Charter. They also deplored the dire humanitarian consequences of the hostilities, especially in Bucha. Disturbing images taken from Bucha, a small town near Kiev last week, showed hundreds of executed civilians, some with their hands tied and gunshot wounds on their heads, lying on the streets after Russian forces withdrew from the city. The four Asian ministers stressed that the situation in Ukraine doesn't only affect Europe, but also Asia, adding that the aggression there jeopardizes the foundation of the international order, which doesn't accept any unilateral change of the internationally recognized borders through the use of force. The minister cited the 1982 Manila Declaration on the peaceful settlement of international disputes and called for de-escalation as well as immediate withdrawal of forces from Ukraine. Meanwhile, they also expressed deep concern about the possible use of nuclear or chemical weapons in armed conflict, saying neither the threat nor the use of it can be tolerated under any circumstances.